Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning, so we beat on. Boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past.
Oh, I just hate that sentence. It's just awful, awful, awful. It's so romantic and so anti-life, you know, the idea that we keep going backwards into the past and we can't ever achieve our goals. It's just detestable. I hate it.
Well, one thing I find interesting about these, actually 2 paragraphs, is that the final sentence is a sentence. But that other paragraph, it eluded us then, but that's no matter, hyphen, tomorrow we will run faster, comma, stretch out our arms farther, dot, 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 and one fine morning, hyphen. So it's like hyphen, hyphen, dot, dot, dot. And then, so we beat on. As if, I love the idea we never complete anything. I don't see it as a line of regret, as a line of, nor even a line of Sisyphean despair, but a line of,
I think it's very defeatist.
So we beat on.
It's very defeatist.
I agree with you that that's the way I used to perceive it, though.
I think the whole book is a terrible defeatist story. I can't stand it. I used to like it once upon a time, but for all the wrong reasons. Because I used to like the idea of recreating the past and living in the past. But now I find that whole idea repulsive, because really the idea of being in the present and moving into the future is what it's all about. Living in the past is not something that's desirable on any level.
I agree. Well, I don't know that he's even saying that it's desirable.
Well, I mean, the
He's
main
saying
character.
it is inherent in the human condition. I don't think he's saying it's desirable.
Well, the main character lives to go back into the past. He wants to go recreate the past.
And we're talking primarily about the novel, but it's had many, many creations. It's had an opera. It's had, oh God, how many films?
A musical. There's been a Yale University musical version of it.
Wow.
Which was really awful.
Did you see it?
I listened to the recording. I used to have it at one point.
I saw the opera. The unfortunate thing about the story is that there isn't a great narrative, except for, spoiler alert, Myrtle's death. There's no real narrative in the story until Myrtle dies, which is way late in the story.
Right. And also the story is actually very flimsy and not that interesting.
Well,
really.
I'd say there's no, that's what I'm implying.
Right.
That there's no story. The story, even the flashbacks, which are meaty, the flashback to when Daisy refused to marry him, or didn't marry him, the flashback to when he made his fortune by meeting that yachtsman. Who is that? Bill Cody? Is that the name of the yachtsman? Anyway, there's events in the past. They're not in the book. The event of Jordan breaking up with Nick is not even really in the book. It occurs off stage, so to speak. And as we talked about whether Jay Gatsby and Daisy Faye Buchanan ever consummate physically their relationship. And you thought no, and I thought yes, because that too, if it occurs completely off stage.
Right. Well, I think that's what actually makes it such a bad story. That there's been a number of film versions that have been made of this book, and all of them tried to sort of flesh out the story and fill in the missing gaps. And when they did that, it became a really terrible, dull story. And it really fell flat on its face. So the strength, which is a negative strength, is in the things that he leaves out. But to me, that's a really poor excuse for a story.
And yet, given your extensive education in ellipses, where things don't happen on screen, like you love Antonioni, and a lot of what happens on screen alludes to the fact that we can't know what actually happens. There's something of that in the construction of this story that we don't really know. We never were present, even in the novel, we're not present to Daisy's romance with Jay. We're present most specifically to the night before her wedding, when she's
Right.
weeping. We're never present to Jordan's relationship with Nick, except in passing. We're not present to their backup. There's like a lot that doesn't happen.
Right. But
Yeah.
that's what makes it weak. I mean, if you take some of the classic Greek stories, you see the events unfold. Everything is clearly identified and
Right, I
understood.
agree with you. It's classically weak.
Yes, classically weak.
And most of his other books,
Are
not
the
to
same.
go... No, I think he has stories in
No, I mean, Tender is the Night is the same. It's
Oh,
full
Tender
of
is the Night
full
is
of-
similar.
similar kind of omissions,
Yeah.
which we're supposed to somehow understand and emotionally.
Yeah. Well, my favorite book of his is The Beautiful and the Damned, because it's very Dickensian. It follows that couple and their rise and fall in fortune. But yeah, and that's not a favorite book of his by most
No,
people.
but I think I like that one better in some ways for those reasons.
Yeah.
But even so, it's not that interesting. I mean, what I find really objectionable to The Great Gatsby now is the fact that all the characters are fake. They've all undergone some process to become something which they were not when they started out. And their fake realities, their fake identities rather, are not desirable. I mean, Jay used to be a honourable soldier, and now he's become this sort of bootlegger or some kind of strange person who does all these underground things and has murdered some people, apparently, according to some people.
Right,
So-
and interestingly, as you talk about it, even that has occurred off stage, and we don't know what's true.
Right,
Yeah.
it's true,
So
but-
go ahead. You were going on.
but-
So Jay has a false
And
personality.
Daisy has married someone who was rich just for the money. She wasn't in love with him, so she's become somebody else in order to.
Yeah. And
do
even
that.
that's questionable. It seems like she might have actually been in love with him at one point.
Well, yeah, but
yeah.
what I'm saying is that
Because she refuses to disavow him.
yes,
That's a critical plot point.
yes.
That's the first critical plot point, and then the second one is Myrtle's death, and then
And then Myrtle as well. She has, gone from her, from being the wife of a garage owner. She's having an affair with this very rich man. So she's trying to be somebody else as well.
rich and hunky man.
Well, that's
Tom is hunky.
beside the point.
It's hard for me
The
to
only
get Karen
person-
Black out of my.
The
my
only
mind.
person who really seems to be genuinely himself, never changes, is Tom Buchanan. He's the rich man, the asshole bastard, whatever you like, all the way through. He never changes. He never changes his opinion. He doesn't become somebody else. All the other characters do, and to me, that's problematic because I don't connect with it. I feel everybody is inauthentic, and it's not an idea that I aspire to. I want people to be who they really are. In some ways, I feel if Fitzgerald had written a story about his life, which is what this book is really about, in first person, dealing with his wife and his own alcoholism, it would have been much more interesting. He tried to do that perhaps in Tender is the Night, but again, that was camouflaged and sort of hidden and whatever. So the fact that he was never able to really be authentic, and part of the reason that he leaves things out is to not tell the truth, to imply things through omission that may or may not be true, and I find that really very annoying.
Dear viewer, there is an alternate point of view, which is that this is really written about the woman he loved before he met Zelda.
Really?
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying there is a theory that it's about, and so is one of his short stories. Maybe The Diamond is Bigger Than Ritz or Winter Dreams. Yeah, there was a woman from the Chicago area. Because if you remember,
Who was that woman?
I can't remember. He didn't marry her.
Right. Okay.
He lost her. But yeah,
Really?
I don't know that this is about Zelda. I don't think Daisy has the character or the complexity that Zelda had. And that's one of the failings of most film versions. Is it's hard for an actress to personify someone who is really empty, never developed herself.
Yes.
Sweet, we love her, sort of, but it never works. I agree with you that Tom Buchanan is the strongest character, and I think Bruce Dern in the Francis Ford Coppola written movie, and what's his name? He's a friend of mine. The actor in the Miro Savino version who played Tom comes off the strongest because he's committed to a point of view.
Yeah.
He may be a hypocrite in that he's allowed to commit adultery, but his wife isn't. But he's committed. He's committed to.
Well, he's authentic. Even though he may be wrong in some of his viewpoints, but he's authentic to himself.
Yeah.
That's the thing. The others have all compromised themselves. They've all become something else.
And Nick
Nick as well.
compromises himself by becoming a panderer, a pimp.
Exactly.
Whether you think that Daisy and Jay consummate, I can't imagine they don't.
No, you're probably right. They probably do, but yeah. So he's also compromising himself, and also the fact that he's moved from the Midwest to New York to sell stock.
Yeah.
There's a kind of compromise in that. He's become somebody
Yeah.
else. So I mean, all of those characters, as a result, for me, although I used to admire Nick and Jay in some ways because I thought they were somehow better than all the other people in the book, as Nick points out. Now I feel that they're all fake. They're all ingenuous and inauthentic, and I don't like any of them. And I don't
Disingenuous.
disingenuous, and I don't like any of the writing either because of the fact that it's just not telling us anything, not telling us the full story. It's leaving out so many details, and it's presuming on our kind of naivety or whatever it is to fill in the gaps and therefore come to a conclusion that this is great. But to me,
I would concur to some extent. Actually, I might concur 100%. And yet, I would say, and yet, well, I totally disagree about the writing, and I may be wrong about the writing, the quality of the language, the prettiness to the ear, but I do think it has become, not unlike other old documents, like the Bible, it has sort of an ethos around it. So I know the opening sentence, and I sort of know the ending sentence. I actually know it's the second paragraph. The father tells Nick, whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. That has tremendous meaning for me, even though it's a very not that meaningful sentence, but it's sort of like Polonius talking to his kids. It's common sense.
I don't agree with that. I mean, it's just silly.
So because you're rather critical of people.
Well, maybe, but I think
don't mean to be
I think
personal.
you have to be.
But you're very smart and you can see through things.
Yes, and you can see. You have to be spontaneous in the moment. So telling somebody to be a particular way is not correct. The better thing is to tell somebody to be as spontaneous and authentic in the moment as you can be. And sometimes that may mean being contradictory to yourself from one moment to the next. But that's the real authentic stuff that I'm looking for. Whereas if you're following a particular path or a particular ideology, that becomes like a moral mask, a moral blindfold that says you can't do it except this way. And that sometimes is not the correct way to do it in the moment. So I don't, and also thinking in terms of Sid Field, the guy that wrote.
I know Sid Field. I know him from my yoga meditation group. He's no longer living, but yeah,
right.
I read his book. I met him. He's a lovely man.
In Screenplay, he talks very much about how any story that relies on flashback is problematic because it's not telling you something in the present and developing from here to there. It's kind of relying on bits from the past that don't quite fit in and they become a jigsaw puzzle, and you're supposed to put it all together.
Okay, so let's say we concur with everything. Do you think this novel, well, why has it lasted then? Why do people
probably because of the mystery, because of the fact that things are not said. People can kind of make assumptions and guesses, and people love that. They love mysteries and thrillers. That's why those kinds of genres are so successful, even though they're really vacuous. And
I would say, okay, can I say what I think? I think that America's addiction to pretending that it is something it's not, and its citizens' addiction to pretending to be something they are not, is what the novel means to be about.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think that's
right.
Ambitious.
Right.
I think it's to some extent successful, and I think the central metaphor of a man who is trying to purchase his way into love, contrary to the Beatles, Can't Buy Me Love, but this is a book about everyone. And Nick finally leaves. I think it's significant that Nick finally leaves. He leaves the East Coast. That's the identification with that which is false. And he leaves it. So I think, as adamant as you are, I think that may have been Fitzgerald's point, that these people are false. All of them. No, and Nick finally gives up.
I don't think
Jordan's a liar.
I don't think Fitzgerald is saying these people are false. I think he's saying that the way to be successful is to be false. That's the message.
That's interesting.
That's the message, and I think that's the American way. That in order to be successful, you have to
You gotta
lie
look
and
at
cheat.
the ending of the book. He is incriminating Daisy and Tom for their. It's totally incriminating them. He glorifies Jay, but Jay is. Well, maybe he's glorified. I think Nick glorifies Jay, but I'm just saying. I don't think he's saying this is the way to success. I think he's saying this is an empty existence.
Yes, but all the people have achieved a level of success by doing, this kind of identity.
And the one who
change.
sacrifices
Yes.
the woman from the
Yes.
working class.
That's right.
There's a political element in this about wealthy people as opposed to poor people. What's the guy's name? The guy with the eyeglasses from Dr. Eccles?
Echo something, yes.
Something. The image. Now, I should say to our viewers that this is not the original cover, which is so beautiful. The original cover is very romantic, and it looks I was told it looks from the plaza down downtown Fifth Avenue, and that the eyes were added afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah.
interestingly, you see them as, well, they certainly resonate with the doctor who oversees the distance between Long Island and New York. But it also looks like Daisy. To me, it looks like a beautiful woman's eyes.
Maybe. I don't know.
It's interesting. It's hard to speak about this without alluding to these films. The Alan Ladd film, as you mentioned, became very melodramatic in an attempt to find a plot for itself.
Yes.
And it has, interesting casting. Alan Ladd and the gangsterism. They have some shots of where Gatsby is involved with like a Tommy gun and a roadster with a, what do they call that thing on the side of a car that you have to stand up on, a running board? And it has Betty Field, who was an inadequate, I think, Hollywood actress, but apparently brilliant on stage. And then Shelley Winters, another quintessential Myrtle. She and Karen Black. And even in the opera I saw, Myrtle's the one who is like right there with herself, Myrtle and Tom. And maybe that's why he likes her. Maybe they're sort of instinctive, visceral creatures.
Right.
Daisy's so distanced from her emotions.
Yep.
She doesn't even want her daughter to be a daughter. What's that wonderful? There are wonderful things in this book, including Daisy. I told my daughter that I hope she. Do you remember she says her wish for her daughter is that she be a pretty nothing head, empty head?
Oh, right. Yes. And that she doesn't marry someone beneath her or something.
She has no self-esteem. Daisy has
Yep.
no self-esteem. Jordan is a cheater. She has no self-esteem either. She's a good golfer, but she'll have to cheat.
Right. That's right.
Nick, maybe, we don't know. Does he turn into something ultimately?
Yes, we don't know.
Does he ever develop a character? And there also was an off-Broadway show called Dan Cody's Yacht. I didn't see it, but... And then the Wooster Group... No, it wasn't the Wooster Group, but it was a similarly avant-garde group. Did a 3 or 4 hour production where they read the entire book.
Oh, that's right, yes.
They memorized the entire book.
And then what was that guy, that comedian who read The Great Gatsby as part of a stand-up routine? He just read the whole thing overnight.
Oh, Andy Kaufman.
Andy Kaufman, yes, that's right.
Yeah. So, whether we like it or not, and even though it's written by a white guy, which is now rather unfashionable to have light skin and be an author, but still, it has a place in the canon. It actually has a place in our culture's consciousness. The fact that Andy Kaufman would seize upon this book.
Well, it's a small book, and it's kind of cutishly written, so it's easy to
What
to
is
get through.
cutishly written about it?
Well, it's popular and kitsch in a way, so it's not demanding.
I'm just glancing through to see if I can find, as I said, pretty. There's something pretty about the writing for me, and maybe that's what you mean by. The lights grow brighter as the earth lurches away from the sun. And now the orchestra is playing yellow cocktail music, and the opera of voices pitches a key higher.
Yes.
So that's a description of part of, right, yeah. It's a description, overview of and cinematically, he's like drawing up and he's making very grandiose I don't know if they're metaphors. They're metaphors.
Yeah,
Yellow cocktail music. And the opera of voices is a metaphor.
he uses very commonly used expressions, but puts them in a different context.
And he makes that's a quality of making you see that what he's writing about is more important than what he's writing about, which is
Right, it's popular. It's like
not bad.
it's like this the Rolling Stones singing "I can't get no satisfaction." It's like a moral, a contemporary feeling that everybody relates to, and therefore it becomes popular. But it doesn't mean that it's great art, because the Rolling Stones "I can't get no satisfaction," in my view, is not such a great song. I mean, it's kind of captured a moment, but it's not that interesting as a song. That's just my view.
well, yeah, it's the actual full sentence. I can't get no satisfaction, but if you try sometimes, you just might get what you need. It's actually
That's a different song.
it's a different song.
Yeah.
What is that song?
That's called "You Can't Always Get What You Want."
That one's better.
Yeah, okay.
Does that make sense?
That's a different thing.
I can't get no satisfaction. Mick Jagger had some charisma, but yeah, I agree.
So, what do we think overall? Do you want to do a little summary of what you think?
What I think is that I fell in love with the book not because I liked the book, but because there was a girl in my college who loved the book so much, and she reminded me so much of Daisy. But so I was going to adapt it. I did adapt it. We never produced it, but so that triggered me into it, and then I just keep bumping up against it in terms of obsession, romantic obsession, obsession with wanting to be what you're not. And when I actually finally saw the latest version, the Leonardo DiCaprio version, may not be the latest, but to me, I wept in the theater, surprisingly,
Really?
even though that wonderful actress was inadequate as Daisy. I think it's very hard to play Daisy. Should we talk about Mia Farrow's wig later? Mia Farrow's wig sort of undermines her entire performance. And when I read in her biography, her autobiography, that she herself recognized her wig destroyed her performance, I went back and looked at her performance and I thought, yeah, she's not terrible. It's the wig.
Oh,
Because you don't want Daisy to look like she has a bad wig.
I think that's an excuse. Come on.
It may have been an excuse, but anyway, she wasn't so bad as I initially thought. I have a friend who actually liked her performance at one point. But anyway, that scene where Jay, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, takes Nick to see how rich he is, I cried. It touched me. It touched the part of me that wants to be loved no matter what, and will use whatever means, and will also be false to myself in order to. And I think that's essentially the thing that is still powerful about the book, not only for males, but for everyone. We will do anything to be loved, and it's often takes us away from our self. I think that book has a good point there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I used to like it when I was a teenager, when I first read it, mainly because of the fact that it seemed to suggest that some people are better than others through their actions. But I don't agree with that idea anymore.
Because Nick says that about Jay's sort of grand actions.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And
that some people are better. Okay. So you used to agree with that.
No, I don't agree with that.
You used to, though.
I used to.
Yeah,
that was why I liked it to begin with,
right,
because there seemed to be this kind of idealistic notion in there that, in spite of the fact that people can be awful to one another, ultimately their intentions are good. Well, I don't agree with that anymore. I think that, like I said, that the most genuine person in the book is Tom Buchanan, because he's true to himself no matter what. He doesn't change who he is. He is who he is all the way through, whereas all the others waver and change as the wind blows to suit the circumstances. And to me, that's a human failing that I don't agree with. I would rather see someone be strong and genuine and authentic to themselves no matter what.
So what's evolving, it seems, through this discussion is that you have an aesthetic criterion that emphasizes or demands a certain moral rigor.
No,
you don't want a
it's
book
not,
teaching.
It's not a moral rigor. It's a way of being. Nothing to do with morals. It's not rules. Because that's just something else.
Okay, but you know what I mean? Like, you think a book has to be of a certain absolute value for its readers. Yeah.
Yeah.
And some people don't think that. I mean,
Right.
but you like Desaad.
Yeah, well, he certainly has
Okay.
interesting values.
I want to read one thing. This is,
Okay.
I don't disagree with you, although I actually continue to like what I like about the ethos of this book. But I think what's interesting, I think I'm right about this, you can help me, is that the initial, what is that called? The little poem beforehand? What do you call that? I think it's false. I think Fitzgerald made it up. I think there's no such poet as this. Then wear the golden hat if that will move her. If you can bounce high for her too, till she cry, lover, gold-hatted, high-bouncing lover, I must have you! Exclamation point. Attributed to Thomas Parc d'Anvilliers. I think there's no such person.
It could be. You could be right.
So it's almost like a Borges. I'm giving you a false introduction to a story about falsehood.
Yeah, well, maybe.
I agree with you that it's about falsehood, definitely.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I admire it for that.
yeah, I don't.
Although I don't like the way that I don't think the book has what we've attributed it to it. The same way I don't think the Ten Commandments. I don't think the biblical stories have what we attribute. Very rarely do any of the biblical stories actually have.
That's right.
Even the Jesus stories, as beautiful as they are, we attribute a lot to them that's not in there.
Exactly. The interpretation becomes the thing. And if you consider it, every single person on the planet who believes in Jesus or God, each one of them has got a totally different version of what that means. None of them actually have the same version. That's why the Hindus have a God for every person. Every person has their own God. It's a completely different idea, but it's actually more accurate because then your God is your God. It's the one that you've made up for yourself, and you know he or she responds to the way. But in the other religions, they all presume to have the same God, and they don't, because none of them have ever matched their ideas of what God represents to them. It's all in their minds.
Yeah. And in some sense, one could say that Nick, by the end of the book, has at least decided that for him, Jay's grandness and his grand gestures, like you when you were a teenager, Nick has seen that's something that he deifies.
Yes.
But it would be interesting when we next visit our viewers, if we can find a way to discover what our deity is that we, because that would also inform what we're looking for from literature and art. Is like what some people have a deity outside themselves. Nick uses Jay in order to maybe learn something about what he really wants to be. But there's something really beautiful about when you read some of this literature out loud. This literature, Daisy's first line to Nick is something about they put mourning wreaths around all the tires of the cars since he's been gone. I can't find it.
Oh, yes.
But when I first read it, I thought, what the hell is she talking about?
That was
and when I read it out loud, I thought, oh my God, that's a very clever, charming, wacky metaphor for a woman to use. No wonder she was so entrancing.
Right.
She has a gift, and I would say Fitzgerald.
But she was lying to him. She was saying that everybody in Chicago is weeping.
Yeah.
It was just ridiculous.
No. But Charm is rather empty.
It's charming, yeah, but it's just a lie. I mean, that's who she is. She lies all
Here
the
it
time.
is. You're right. And maybe that's what we fall in love with, is liars, at least when we're teenagers.
Yes.
Maybe it's a teenage book. Maybe Nick is essentially a teenager. The whole town is desolate. All the cars have the left rear wheel painted black as a mourning wreath, and there's a persistent wail all night along the North Shore.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And then he says immediately, she says, how gorgeous. Let's go back, Tom.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, as a teenager, I could relate to that, because you have those kind of grandiose ideas about how life should be. That would be something that I would think, oh, that's what I want them to do for me.
Yeah.
But now I'm thinking, no, that's ridiculous. In the same way, in the same light, I used to adore Jean Cocteau's writing because it was like that. It was so romantic. But now I can't stand it. It's so wordy and so romantic. It's just unbearable. I prefer things that are much simpler and more authentic and really basic.
I've always felt if you could find someone who could play Daisy, who could provide the center around which all this desire, she's a metaphor for the falseness of America. America pretends to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, and it killed all the Native Americans. And America had slaves. It pretends to be, America condescends to everyone else in the world who is at all politically incorrect, but America was the most politically incorrect. America...
Well, the thing is that America is appropriate. It uses whatever it needs to use in the moment. It's more like Tom Buchanan. They do what they need to do, and they don't care about, what other people think.
A little bit, but like Daisy too, it needs the prettiness of a Daisy. And Tom and Daisy are a good team.
Yeah.
He's willful, and she makes it seem nice.
She's charming. That's
yeah.
Good